live streaming now. Thank you, Chair.
Chair, if you could unmute yourself for us, please.
Hello and welcome and communities. Chris McIntyre speaking, Chair of Culture and Communities. The usual rules apply. Sorry, I'm not too good at the moment. If you need to comment or ask a question, please go through the chair. Okay, we'll move on to the agenda. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chair, we have apologies from Councillors Carolyn Hodds and Janet Thompson, Chair.
Cheers, thank you. Item 2, any declaration of interests? Take that as a no. Item 3, can we agree the minutes of the last meeting? Okay, item 4, we have Richard Horniman here to provide an overview. Whenever you're ready, Richard.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen, if that's okay. This may take a moment. Right. Have you got the full screen version there now?
Yeah, we can see that.
Yeah, great. So today I was just going to talk through where we're at with events and how we're having to deal with things. And obviously it's a very pertinent topic at the moment with what's happening. Certainly with the different tiers of lockdown. So I'll go through this and obviously stop me at any point if you've got a question, or I'll answer questions at the end. And I've got a few questions to pose for the group at the end. Unfortunately, I can't see you while I've got the presentation on the screen, so you would need to shout. Okay. So the council does and funds events for a set range of objectives. This is something that we took through executive a while back. The first one is about raising the profile of the area. It's about making sure that people know where Middlesbrough is, what Middlesbrough stands for, what's available in Middlesbrough, and making sure that Middlesbrough's name is getting mentioned. It's also about attracting higher footfall and increasing dwell time. What we want ideally is as many people as possible to attend events, but also to stay in the places that those events are on, spend money, go into different, whether it's food and beverage places, whether it's shops, and generally spend more time here. Obviously, for some of the bigger events, we're looking at generating hotel stays, restaurant bookings, public transport use. and it's really about generating that economic impact from having the event. But some of them are also just about community engagement, boosting local pride and bringing communities together. Now, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily smaller events. Some of our bigger events are about doing that as well. But we've got that spread of reasons why we do put on events. Now, the council's role differs depending on what the event is. We would prefer just to provide support to others to deliver events because that's a more efficient use of time and money. But a lot of these events we tend to take quite a big role in, and some of them we put on ourselves. So we do help people who come forward with ideas and want advice. They might want advice around the technical aspects, about the licensing aspects, about the safety aspects. We might advise them where to go for funding. So there's a sliding scale there of how involved we get in each particular event. If somebody's wanting to hold an event on our land, we need to give permission for that, and we would go through the full safety procedures with them and make sure that everything was in place for that. We have this thing called the Independent Safety Advisory Group, which we're a member of, along with the fire brigade, the police and others, which looks at granting permission for events to take place and make sure that they're done in a safe manner. So again, we provide a lot of support through there. There are some events that others provide that we fund, and there's obviously a range of events that we fund and deliver ourselves. Now, we only have a budget of £68,000 a year for events, and we only have 1.5 full-time equivalent members of staff doing events. So as you can see, we're spread fairly thinly across quite a large range of activity that's happening. So obviously, the less we have to do to make an event happen, the better. So a few examples picked from the usual events programme would be, we help the Middlesbrough Mellor Committee, we help them with funding, we help them with advice, we help them through a lot of the safety processes. We fund and host Orange Pip ourselves. We run the Discover Middlesbrough events, again in conjunction with others. And Animex is a good example where the university hold a very big event, very successful event, but we sit on the board of Animex, we provide advice for Animex and occasional funding. We tend to take the lead on the Christmas events, things like the Reindeer Parade and the Light Switch On, which are quite expensive to do, but get very high footfall. We're obviously involved very much in Armed Forces Day and support some of the religious events. We also fund through public health, so it sits outside of that 68,000. The race weekends that we have, the 10k and the 5k road races. And then occasionally we get events that sit completely outside of all of this. Like last year, if it was only a year ago, we had Radio 1's One Big Weekend, which obviously is funded from elsewhere. We needed to allocate a large amount of money to that. Has a huge impact, has a huge logistical exercise around it, but obviously brings huge financial benefits for us as well. What I haven't put on there, because we don't tend to class them as events, I guess, but we do support them in the same way, is things that are on at the football club. And obviously they're now getting into hosting concerts and all sorts of things now. So for 2020, we had some big plans. Mika Smiles, the executive member for Culture and Communities, is very keen on us improving the visibility of Middlesbrough through its events. So we had big plans, particularly around Orange Pip, growing the brand, having more events, having different types of events that come under that Orange Pip brand. One of the things that we were looking to do was build relationships with sponsors and funders, because with £68,000, there's only so much you can do. We can do some of it more efficiently. We can contribute a bit less to events. But ultimately, if we want more of those bigger events, we need to have the relationship with sponsors. We need to have the relationship with funders so that when an idea comes along, we know that they're likely to back us. But as I'm sure everybody has noticed, we've had a slight health situation this year that has scuppered a lot of that programme and essentially has just paused everything from an events perspective. So just to run through some of the challenges that we have there, because they're not all necessarily that obvious, but we've had to deal with social distancing. So we've had some very small events that have still taken place, but obviously we need to factor in that you can't locate people within a metre to 2 metres of each other. Now, when you're trying to run something in the town hall on a commercial basis and sell tickets for it, it's reasonably marginal at best anyway. You tend to get most of your takings through the bar, and the cost of the ticket tends to cover the performer and the promotion. So if you've got social distancing and you can only have half as many people in, then it's not unreasonable to assume that the amount of money you will take is also half. And that means from a commercial perspective, we're better off not hosting the vast majority of events. We've got to look at how we manage people in their individual bubbles, which is not a phrase I ever thought I'd be saying a year ago. But that's something that has to be factored into the type of events that we're able to do and the way we put them on. We've also had prolonged retail closures, certainly between March and June, which again means that some of the events that we would have put on in the town centre, it was pointless because they wouldn't then have had the impact on the retail sector and the food and beverage sector. obviously hospitality businesses there. We know that a lot of arts organisations have got no income coming in at the moment. So again, where we would partner with them on a different range of events, that just can't happen at the moment because they don't have capacity to do it. A lot of the places we go to for funding, naturally their budgets are being cut either because they're government funded or because they're funded by income from other things. There's nobody really wanting to sponsor anything at the moment because there's not a huge impact that they will get for their contribution because people aren't necessarily going to be able to go and do whatever it is they're sponsoring. But to be honest, the biggest issue for us is not necessarily dealing with the day-to-day stuff and the situation as it is each day. It's the uncertainty over future restrictions. With an event, you tend to plan them in up to a year in advance. For the bigger ones, even longer than that. But at the moment, we don't know in a year's time whether we'll still be in the same situation, or we might be completely back to normal, or we might be somewhere in between. But equally, we don't know how the public are going to feel about attending events. We know we've done a lot of research with our customer base when the first wave finished about how comfortable would you be coming back into an indoor space in a reasonable sized crowd? And the vast majority of people responded with, we just wouldn't. We'd certainly leave it a long time before we had the confidence to come and do that again. So that's something that we couldn't guess at those two things because we just have nothing to base it on. Now, when we want to hold an event and plan an event, to do anything significant towards it, we have to book things, we have to book artists, we have to book space, we have to book different types of stalls and all that kind of stuff. And cancelling an event gets very expensive because you have to pay deposits, you have to do all sorts of things. And anything that we spend on things like promotion, if you cancel the event, it's all been abortive. So we've taken a very cautious approach, to promoting, to booking, to doing anything. And I think we've been proven right so far because there was events that we were going to reschedule for the period that we're in now that we just wouldn't have been able to hold. And as an example, we've got events, these are more shows because they're internal, but we've got shows in the town hall that were cancelled back in March, were booked back in for October, have been cancelled again, and the promoters are not comfortable putting anything in before late summer next year. And again, we've got to take the same approach with events where we could potentially be paying out costs. And the reality is it could be a flip of a coin whether we're allowed to actually hold the event or not, never mind whether people would have the confidence to turn up. So the position we've taken is, as I say, we've pretty much cancelled all events. We've held some small test events inside and outside of the town hall, but generally speaking, we've cancelled everything and taken that cautious approach. We would have organised our full Christmas programme well before now. And what we've done is we've had almost a moving target with Christmas. We've looked at, well, if we can't do things that cause gatherings in the town centre of the scale that we would want to, can we take some of those events out to the public and do parades, perhaps where people live? But even then, the latest restrictions that we've got suggest that we shouldn't do that either. So we're having to come up with a Christmas programme that supports the retailers and the food and beverage outlets that will be open, but it doesn't do anything to cause people gathering in one place. So we're looking more at things like trails, things where people will move around rather than stand still. It's very difficult for us to make commitments to events that would be happening in the spring and potentially the summer. So a lot of those are kind of on ice, and we're very hesitant about making commitments to people that we know we're going to cancel and trying to keep those abortive costs as small as possible still. So really, obviously happy to answer any questions, but the main things that I thought would be useful as a group to go through is, one of the main reasons we have events is to generate economic activity, and that's focused on the town centre. And the perfect event for us will be something somebody comes to they enjoy for the event's sake, and then they spend the rest of the day spending money in the town centre when they wouldn't have otherwise come here or stayed as long. But how can we boost the town centre when it desperately needs it, when we can't really encourage gathering? How can we plan for 2021-22 with no certainty both on restrictions but also on public confidence? Looking at that issue of will people ever feel completely confident about being in large crowds again, or will we have to go through a process whereby we lose large portions of the audience, people who are vulnerable, people who are older perhaps, who are much more reluctant to come to something? And then the final question, which is it's just an open question, it's one that we know nobody has the answer to. Will we actually be allowed to hold events next year? There's a lot of debate around at the minute where some events are allowed to happen, but people can't attend football matches. We don't know next year whether some of those dynamics will have changed, whether things have got worse and everything's cancelled, or whether we're dealing with a situation where you can do most things as long as you're sensible. We just don't know at this stage. So it's really just to throw those questions open. Chair.
Chair, can I come in there? Question for Richard. Chair, microphone's off. Yeah. Can I come in there? Richard, are there any plans to explore regional or sub-regional solutions to delivering the cultural events?
We have talked before all of this struck. There's a lot of discussion at sub-regional level about who's doing what events, because there is a general principle of working together to avoid clashing with the big events that we all do. But we've also talked about the combined authority making quite a big investment in events over the coming years. They've allocated a lot of money in their culture budget, and they were going to focus a lot of that on events. And particularly as an example, I think the whatever celebration time-wise of the railways in Darlington has got a big events program around it that the combined authority were going to invest in. And they were going to make money like that available to all of the areas in the Tees Valley. But that's gone on hold. They're still talking about that. And I think what they would prefer to do is they will take the lead on some very big strategic things, like the Rugby World Cup, for example, and they will leave the rest of it to the individual authorities, but will be prepared to put money in. It's just at the minute, none of that money's flowing. And to be fair, we couldn't have spent it. But yes, in future years, when things settle a little bit to whatever ends up being the way we operate, there is a much greater need to work together. But I think everybody's geared up to do that anyway.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for that. Any further questions?
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, please.
This is rather a bit of a historical thing, actually, but it could be for the future, and transport a bridge. When all the work was done around the centenary, whatever, it was going to be a visitor attraction. Unfortunately, that whole plan seems to have fallen flat on its face. It never really got off the ground because of the booking situation. People would turn up from all over the country to see the transporter and go up the transporter and across the and they couldn't do it because we had a ridiculous booking situation. Can we look at that for future times when we get back to normal, so it could be used as a visitor attraction?
Well, the short answer is definitely yes. Yeah.
Any further questions for Richard?
Yeah, can I just say, could Richard take the slides down, please? Because I can't see anything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, thanks, Chad. It's not really a question, it's just a statement, you know. having listened to the update what Richard has, it's very sad times really, and nobody knows what's going to happen. As Richard said, maybe he's into late summer next year. We don't know when the restrictions are going to ease at all. It's just sad to see. Everybody's maybe got their hands tied behind the back until things get better. But it really is a sad time, but for not just for Middlesbrough, I think for the whole country. Cheers, chat.
Thanks.
Can I ask another question?
Any further questions?
Yeah. Richard, as I believe the government's released more funding. Was this for cultures or was it for that specifically? Or
Well, there's I don't want to say there's quite a lot of money being dished out at the moment because it's never going to be enough.
no.
But there is a fair bit of money being distributed at the moment to help arts organisations survive, to help organisations that would be reliant upon events and that kind of thing to keep ticking over. And obviously we've been the recipient of some of that ourselves in the last week or so. So there is money there, and to some extent, if you think about the council's own budget, we can't put the events on, but we're not spending the money. So it's not financially disastrous to us that those events are not put on. But when you think about things like the retailers, for example, they will rely on a programme of events to keep the footfall going in the town centre, and there's not really any money there to replace that.
Right. So those that are involved with the events within the council, are their jobs secure?
Well, they are, because we've got them doing other stuff.
Right.
We've got them. Well, it helps us get ahead for future programmes, but we're trying to do stuff. For example, if you take Christmas, instead of doing something grand in the town centre, we know we should be able to do something at Newham Grange Leisure Farm, because it's outdoors, it's very well managed in terms of you can control the flow of people. So we've got them working on having probably a more spectacular Christmas at Newham Grange Leisure Farm than we would have otherwise been able to do. So it's not that we're not able to do anything. It's
differently.
It's the things where you've got kind of they're open to all of the public that are really difficult, because you can't control how many people turn up, where they stand, who they mix with, and all those kind of things. Whereas in a venue like that, you've got much more control over it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Richard?
I've got a couple if all the members are finished, Chair. If that's all right, Richard, if I can.
Yeah. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, is that all right? It's just to take it back a little bit further about the general context of cultural events, I suppose. The presentation is very interesting, but it's focused more on the response to COVID and the situation that we're in with cultural events as a consequence of COVID, which is pertinent and extremely important.
Mm-hmm.
But going back before COVID, it's just the idea of, as you've alluded to, that cultural events can feed into other dynamics apart from the economic advantages, the social cohesiveness of small communities in different parts of the town. How do we measure the impact, both pre-COVID and any events that we are able to hold post-COVID as well? What kind of metrics are available to measure the impact of cultural events, given that they feed into so many different things in society?
Yeah. Well, it's a difficult one to answer from the community perspective, because what we do have is, if we hold an event, and if you take one big weekend as an example, there are established models that are used right across the country for working out, if you put in a number of variables about who turned up, where they've come from, all that kind of stuff, as to what the economic impact would be on your town. If you hold something like the Mellor, for example, which is very community focused but is in the centre of town, again you can still use that model and it'll generate an amount to be true, but they're a nationally accepted model for doing it. I think when you're doing events in communities directly, or you've got other non-economic objectives for doing it, they become really, really difficult to measure. And to some extent, you can only really do that kind of stuff through surveys, and whether they've helped people feel more connected, whether they've helped people feel more part of a community. It's really difficult to do other than through surveys, which are obviously traditionally quite difficult things to do anyway.
Oh, thanks. Just if I may, Chair, we've got if nobody else on the panel's got any more questions, can I keep on? I've only got a couple, I promise. I'm not going to bombard you with all these questions, if I may, Chair. It's about the format, and going back to Councillor Arundale's comment about the transporter bridge, really, and the format of events. And although there's a lot of uncertainty and you can't plan for events as such at the moment because the regulations may change and whatnot, with the transporter bridge and the fact that Middlesbrough historically, and this is up for debate, may not have had as strong a cultural presence as, say, like the likes of Newcastle, as an example, and we were kind of building that reputation through things like the place brand introduction and the social regeneration agenda. If this is the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future, with restrictions on how close people can be to each other, etc., are there any thoughts about a permanent change in format for events? Maybe not having a lot of small one-off events across the town, for example, but more like Darlingtons that you're explaining have the heritage of the railways. Is there anything we could foster in the town to develop a long-term cultural offer for sustainability purposes? So it's not just appealing to the residents of Middlesbrough, but you attract a wider audience, which again brings the footfall in. Even though there's those restrictions in place, you might not make as much money, for example, as you did previously. You're still going to be able to actively contribute to the wider economic future of the town, perhaps.
Yeah. That's one of those questions where probably all my cultural colleagues within the service will wince, because I'm going to answer it honestly. Darlington have got the railways. They'll always have the railways, and they'll always be the birthplace of the railways, and that will always attract an international crowd, albeit, just be careful what I say, probably a crowd that is dwindling in reality, because people being born now will only have the view of the modern railways and all that kind of stuff. So it's still a very big international attraction in a way, and we don't have an equivalent. I think the closest we've got is the kind of iron and steel stuff. And what we do find is people locally get very passionate about the iron and steel stuff. When we talk to people from further afield, it's not something that excites them. So there is clearly a market for that, but it's quite a small one. And I suspect, like the railways, although possibly even more so than the railways, that's a dwindling market. I think Middlesbrough's got to look at, we probably haven't got a natural theme or attraction that we can do better than everybody else, because we've got something that they haven't. The thing that I've always thought we could make a lot more of, and would have been part of our future plans and hopefully still will be, is the multicultural aspect. We've got a very strong Mellah. People keep telling me it's the best Mellah outside of Birmingham, but it's of a certain size and it only gets a certain level of investment. Now, one of our questions would be, if you doubled or trebled the amount of investment and support that went in, could you double or treble the size of the impact that gets? Could that be more of a programme rather than a one-off event, albeit it's a not just a one-day thing? So I think something that we could do better than other people, could get that impact from, but you'd probably have to do it in different ways, is probably the multicultural end of things, because you've got quite literally a world of possibilities there in terms of the types of things. And again, once you get into things like multicultural activities, you've also got quite a wide range of different audiences as well. So I think if we were to expand something, that has real potential, it's probably that rather than a thing that's in the town. James Cook, for example, is obviously something which you can hang a lot of things on, but depending on what period of time we're in, that can be controversial or not. But again, he's very important to a relatively small group of people. So there's only so much you can do with Captain Cook, for example. There's only so much you can do with iron and steel, just like there's only so much you can do with the railways. But we need to look at those things that you can do more with because we're good at it and because we've got an established name and an established audience for it that you can grow rather than starting from scratch. So I think I've probably rambled on there and haven't upset anybody, but I think that's probably where we've got an untapped seam of potential.
Thanks, Richard. Chair, if I may, just one more question. Sorry, Richard. Just one more question. It kind of ties in with, I know, the Chair of the Economic Development and the Environment. I'll get that name wrong every single time. The Economic Development Scrutiny panels here as well. And I think they're looking towards the 10% regeneration and how we can do things from an economic perspective. Because, again, we've already alluded to that cultural events feed into that, and a lot of what a cultural event will bring is cash, essentially, a lot of footfall for retailers and so on. Is there any active work that's ongoing at the moment that could contribute to that work as well from a cultural perspective?
Well, we're waiting on the Future High Streets Fund and the Towns Fund bids, and culture and activities and events is a very strong feature in both of those. And obviously we're trying to change the mix within the town centre to being much more or much less retail dominant, because obviously the world's heading that way. So there's a lot we can do. What format we can do it in, we don't really know yet. So if you look, for example, some of our aspirations about increased leisure in the centre of town, you would look at completely new things there, like e-gaming and that kind of thing. And if you have a venue that is built around esports arena and all those kind of concepts that are mystifying to me, I've got to be honest. But those are the sorts of things that you can have a whole stream of events around, particularly if you've got things like big screens up in the centre. You can put temporary screens up. So you can generate events just because people are watching something that's going on anyway. So there's a whole host of things we can do potentially around making the centre somewhere where people want to be to experience culture or experience events without them necessarily being the mass crowds of people sat in one place. But I think it's fair to say that we haven't got our heads around how we do that yet. And I don't think most places have.
I suppose that feeds in through you, Chair. I suppose it feeds in with work that you've already explained. Now, I was looking on the Town Hall's Facebook page, and like the move to still holding events in a different format, so you're still able to gain the reach to people through virtual means, like we're doing here in this meeting, so we can still conduct the business, whatever that may be. In this case, it's a committee, but for cultural events, it's to hold an event, to have people interact with that event in different formats, isn't it, I suppose?
It is, and I suppose that gives you the opportunity to be more inclusive with some of these things as well. But as we're finding, both from a personal perspective, but also from kind of our aspirations work-wise, in the summer, there's a lot more scope to do stuff, because people, you can have performances outside that are spread out, that are socially distant, that are safe, that are less about having everybody there at one point in time. But in the winter, when it's chucking it down with rain, and Middlesbrough Town Centre is a very windy place, you're just not going to get the same impact from those. So I think we have to understand a little bit more about how long this is with us for and adapt to it. And I think at the moment we're still at the stage where we're slightly bewildered by it, trying to adapt to the day-to-day stuff, but not really able to plan for well, actually, in a year to 2 years' time, we'll be allowed to do 50% of the mixing that we were allowed to do before. So we'll plan for that. We're still scrabbling around trying to understand what's happening.
I think you're pleased to know, Chair and Richard. I don't think we've got any more questions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. Are there any further questions?
Chair, can I just come in a second? It's just more or less to talk to Richard. As Scott said, I'm chair of the Economic Development and Infrastructure. Nearly got it right, Scott. But I've been trying to get some. You'll have to think in the future now, as you say. It could take 2 years, could take 3 years before everything probably gets anywhere near back to normal. But I'm a big believer this town is. You mentioned an attraction. I'm a big believer in this town should have a venue big enough to hold massive concerts, not the likes in the town hall. I went to see Paul Carroll 18 months ago, old 1500, the Crypt, I believe. I'm talking. I mean, the football club proved it last year. That was 34,000 people. The town, and you mentioned the big weekend not so long ago. Over that period of the weekend, there wasn't a bed and breakfast, a hotel room available, and I'd love to know the actual figures what this town made in the likes of money on that. I just think, obviously, if we had a venue, you'd have to start thinking about it now to look for funding and possibly agreement. That's what Middlesbrough could do with. I mean, even going back to. Middlesbrough haven't got an Olympic-sized swimming pool. Amy Wilmot, Olympic medalist, she had to go to Sunderland to practice. Now that's another attraction. What could, I just think we should start thinking big for future years, not now. I know we're all sad and miserable about this COVID, but we really should start thinking about future years and what could attract footfall into this town, in a big way to attract, because obviously you've got big footfall in events. Other businesses will want to come here because they'll know there's money. And I just really think it's, I did mention it a number of years ago to Dave Budd when he was deputy mayor, and I think it was I can't remember the chief exec, but Dave's answer was, well, if somebody come to us, we'd listen. Well, I'd say we should start looking out for people, for funding. And let's have a big venue that can hold 20, 30,000. Look at the Newcastle Arena, and then you've got the Sage at Gateshead. Very close, but when there's top acts there, they fill it out. They fill it out, and the pubs and the clubs and the hotels are chocker. That's my comment about that. That's it.
Do you want me to respond to that, Chair? Don't disagree with what you've said in the slightest. Unfortunately, two of the examples you've mentioned there about an arena and a swimming pool, the things that some places have got and some places haven't, and we have take the arena, done quite a lot of work looking at an arena for Middlesbrough. And the problem is wherever you build them, they lose a colossal amount of money for whoever operates them. So it's not that you couldn't do it, you just have to do that as a choice rather than doing something else. It wouldn't be something that somebody is going to do because there's money to be made. But it depends what the strategic choices are for the town as to whether, if that's something we want and that's what we're prepared to pay on an ongoing basis, then absolutely go for it. But I'm not sure that there's a clear view on what one of those things would be.
Thanks, Richard. Any further questions? Okay. Well, thanks for your input, Richard. It was very valuable. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.
If you need to leave, feel free to leave, and we'll move on to the next item. Okay.
Cheers. Thank you, Chair.
All right. Thanks, Richard. Okay, the next item is overview and scrutiny board summary of the last meeting. The Mayor provided an update on how we are dealing with COVID and council finances. Councillor Chris Hobson provided an update on finance and governance. The Chief Executive and Director for Public Health provided an update re-COVID, and has provided an update of the work they are doing. That was it. Next item, any urgent business? Okay, I'll take that as a no. So I can close the meeting. Thank you all for your input.
Thank you, Chair.